Todd, I know you've done a lot of businesses already before, and now the most recent one is Hydrolix. Can you tell us how you actually started with Hydrolix and how you started your entrepreneurial career?
Sure. Yeah. So going back to the beginning, my background's in software engineering. I was, one of those kids that got a computer young. Played lots of video games, and then wanted to figure out how to build stuff myself. And so that's what actually got me into software development, was just wanting to build things for myself. And so through that, kind of went through college, did electrical engineering, and slowly got more into building software professionally after college, and you know really enjoyed the process of just taking an idea and seeing it turn into something that people could actually use. And so I worked at a company for a while called Pivotal Labs. They were a software consultancy. I worked in the New York City office, but you know startups would have funding and an idea, and they would just come to Pivotal and say, hey, help me build this. So we did the whole agile test driven development thing. And I got kind of hooked on, like, oh, we can build so much cool stuff. Um, and so yeah, after doing that for a while, really wanted to build my own tooling, and just kind of really got excited about building my first company. And so that one was it was an observability company before observability was really a term in the industry. And so that company ended up becoming InfluxData. So we built a time series database, kind of with the intention of storing observability data. So time series data, metrics, all that stuff. And
Could you
this
just,
was back
could you
in,
explain that a little bit more details? So,
yeah,
like, what
sure.
it exactly is, because I think our audience will probably not know what it is.
Yeah.
So that would be awesome.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, this would have been 2013, 2014, we were building that company. And the idea is, and this was relatively novel back then, but like, you have all these applications and systems that are, doing stuff that you want to get some insight into. So you want to get, metrics from them. You want to be able to get some insight, like, is my application working? And so before we had Prometheus, before we had Grafana and any of these tools to really monitor systems, we needed ways to actually store that data. And the stuff that existed at the time was very, very primitive, very low volume. And so we built InfluxDB as a way of saying, hey, this data that you want to collect is scaling and growing. We're going to build a system a database that's designed specifically for storing this kind of data at scale. And so even at the time, we had no concept of how big, like, that the space was going to become, and also how much data people were going to start generating. And obviously, everything that's going on with AI now, like, the trajectory just keeps getting more and more crazy. But so InfluxDB was really kind of one of the first open source time series databases, so that we could actually store, on the order of like hundreds of thousands or millions of data points per second, of this kind of like observability data. And so now, companies like Datadog, like, are, have commercialized this and taken it, even further. But that was really my first entrepreneurial kind of adventure, and it ended up being a relatively significant open source project. And that company's still around, still growing, still doing stuff in observability and the Internet of Things space. But the rest of my career, I kind of stayed close to that, that area. Like, it was always in and around observability. And I built another company called Era Software. It was
What?
more focused on the logs than the metrics. Sorry, you were going to ask something, Lucas.
No, my question is like, what made you so obsessed with observability?
Yeah, I think what really got me excited initially was that it was a problem that I was trying to solve for myself. Like, I built these systems, and it's really annoying when you don't have the tools to be able to know, like, is this thing even working? Like, I want to know when something breaks, and it was really tough. And again, go back to like 2010, 2011, the tools available for doing that were really limited. And so it was really fascinating to be able to build this stuff that you could then go use on your own projects and your own things that you were building. So that was what got me started initially, and then what really kept it going was seeing how much of a challenge it was to actually keep these systems working at scale as these data volumes kept growing. And what used to be, I remember, like, the first time we were able to do 1 million data points per second on InfluxDB, and it was like, oh my god, this is so amazing. And then it was like, then a year or two later, then the ball moved, and it was like, oh, now we need to do 10, and then now we need to do 100. And now, again, I kind of mentioned moving into logs, which are even more, high volume, more data. And like now we talk to companies all the time that are doing 100 terabytes a day of logs, just log data. And,
What?
that's not it's not that used to be, like, unfathomable, and now that's not that crazy. And some of our customers now doing big events, they'll do, on the order of, like, a petabyte a day of logs, and it's just, like, it's so crazy. So building these systems, figuring out how to scale them, figuring out how to keep all that infrastructure moving so that you can actually monitor your systems, keep them running, like, it's all just a really fun challenge to be able to do that stuff at scale.
How do you scale that? Because we're talking about sizes that are, I think people don't even know the words that you just used. Like, what are these, like gigabytes? They know terabyte maybe, but peta, they don't know these measurements. Are we talking about server farm sizes? What are we talking here? That because this is incredible amounts of data that you're talking
Yeah,
about.
it is. Yeah, so terabyte is a thousand gigabytes basically, and then petabyte is 1,000 terabytes. So the petabyte is a million gigabytes. That's the quick path to it. Um, yeah, I mean we're definitely talking about distributed systems. So we're talking about this is not running on one virtual machine or even 10. A lot of these things at scale, we're talking hundreds of machines. Obviously for all this stuff all this data that's coming in, you need to be able to store that data. So you need storage behind it. Sometimes we can use object storage, whether that's S3 on Amazon or GCS on Google Cloud. We need storage that scales. We need compute that scales. We need memory that scales. And so a big part of going from where we were 10 years ago to now is we've had to build these systems that can, be really flexible and scale and be able to respond to changes in load, changes in traffic. And so a lot of the innovations that have gotten us from, you know, one node of InfluxDB 10 years ago doing a million points per second to us doing, you know, hundreds of millions or billions now is like all of this infrastructure that really makes it possible to scale. And obviously, like, cloud services are a huge part of this. Like nobody would be doing this if they had to deploy their own hardware in most situations. And so all of these things kind of working together, Kubernetes and containers and all that stuff have been a big part of it as well.
Todd, what's broken in today's data stack that people still don't realize?
Oh man. Well, I think my lens is from observability. And so I think one of the big things that we see is that I think a lot of people, and this is shifting a bit with AI, but I think a lot of people they get so overwhelmed by data volumes that they just start like throwing stuff away, And so for us, when we talk to customers that are looking at logs, and sometimes these logs don't feel that important in the moment, and then they realize months later that, like, oh, we had this security incident. How am I going to go back and figure out what happened because I threw all that data away? And so I think that's a piece where a lot, and again, this is from the observability perspective in like specifically, but um, finding ways to be able to store all that data reliably and be able to use it for other things later is, I think, a critical thing that a lot of companies miss. And it generally comes down to just a cost issue. But I think as we are moving towards this, rapidly moving towards this world where we've got all these autonomous agents and AI tools that can do a lot more for us, we're starting to see, like, oh, actually, all these logs that I thought nobody was ever going to take the time to look at, well, now I can have agents go and just rip through those. I can have, these kind of like autonomous tasks that are going and either getting value out of them or looking for insights. And so being able to keep that data is actually a really important kind of predictor of what you're going to be able to do in the future.
So, would you say that observability is the new cybersecurity in the AI era? Because, like, basically, when you have more data and you can look through all of them.
Yeah, yeah, and I think in a lot of ways, if you look at security vendors, like they position themselves similarly to an observability company, but it's for like very specific sets of data. And so, from a pricing perspective, security companies are generally much more expensive than an observability product, because a lot of the way observability has been positioned is like you are really concerned with what's happening right now with your services. Like, you don't care as much that your service crashed yesterday. You care if it's running right now. And so a lot of it has been shorter retention periods. Maybe you'll keep data for 3 days or a week. Whereas security companies have generally had a posture of like, you want to keep your most important data for longer. And so I think what we're going to see is these two, two spheres of products continue to merge more closely together. Where, especially with these AI features, like your ability to analyze how your infrastructure performed, your ability to look at um, security events over time, like all these things are going to be valuable if you can keep that data. And so I think security is becoming more like observability, and observability is becoming more like security. And I think we're going to see those just keep growing together, especially as AI makes a lot of these workflows more powerful.
So why do still currently most systems rely on sampling instead of full data?
I mean, it's a cost thing. Like, I think for a lot of these systems, it's you know, it's difficult. Like when you just think about the conceptually, like if you are generating a petabyte a day of logs, you have to think about that means you're pushing a petabyte of data over the network. Like, and that's not even your product's data. That's just the data to like observe your infrastructure. So you have to push that over the network. So if you're sending it across cloud providers, you're looking at egress fees, which could be you know, that's an astronomical amount of money you're spending on egress. The data to store it, the data to query it. And so I think for a lot of companies, they look at the trade-off and they just say, I don't need all this. I can get by with less. So when it comes to, budget, if you don't have like a strong business reason and somebody says like, well, hey, you could sample the data or you can have some, even there are some companies with AI sampling that say like, I'll look at your data and I'll make sure we keep the important stuff. You're still you're still trusting a system to say that something is more important based on what it knows right now.
Because you said 1 petabyte of data of logs, but like, what kind of companies actually create this amount of data each day? Like,
Yeah, so I mean, big, really big companies are at that scale, and so and as an example, at Hydrolix, we were doing CDN observability. So CDNs are content delivery networks. So when you have a big media or
Cloudflare
entertainment event, yeah, what's that?
isn't yeah, Cloudflare has CDN.
Cloudflare, yeah,
Yeah.
Akamai is one that we work really closely with. Fastly is another one, and so um, when you're streaming a big event like at the Super Bowl for us at Hydraulics, you've got hundreds of millions of viewers. You're streaming all this data to them, and so when we are looking at those really big high traffic events, those can easily generate many hundreds of terabytes a day or a petabyte a day of logs. And that's just for the CDN traffic. So looking at all the data that's being streamed, quality, frame rates, all that stuff is coming through in logs. Um, and so that happens pretty regularly, with these major sporting events. And then there are some companies that just are really, I mean, like, no doubt, Amazon obviously is probably well past this. And then, a lot of these other big companies that are in big businesses where there's a lot of either like heavy consumer traffic or heavy API traffic can easily hit, half a petabyte to a petabyte a day.
At what scale does investing in observability actually start to matter? Because like, is it like a startup which is like starting to scale, or really just scale ups who are already making hundreds of millions?
I mean, I think earlier, it's getting earlier and earlier for companies. And I think now there are a lot of ways for you to get some observability just on day one of your product. You want to know, like, when you're building anything, like, you want to know who's using it, what's the quality of the experience that they're getting. And so, most companies want to have some amount of observability from the beginning. But I think, you know, a lot of this is linear with traffic and with the complexity of your product. And so, you know, you might be spending 10 or $100 a month when you're a small company, and then that grows to 1,000 and then 10,000. And, as your traffic grows and as you start to build more services, you just sort of slowly see that bill rise. And that's, most startups don't just start on day one and, spend that kind of money on observability, but it grows over time. And that's where they get you.
So, what is the biggest mistake that startups make when they're building their data infrastructure, like small up?
I mean, I would say the biggest thing that we see is probably like actually failing to think about using observability tools early on. And so we see this with really big companies that are trying to go back and retrofit. There's a kind of an emerging standard called Open Telemetry OTel. And it's sort of like a standardized way of sending metrics, logs, and traces from your applications. And so it's become a kind of way of staying vendor neutral in the observability space. But big companies have these sort of seemingly ambitious initiatives to go back and put OTel in everything. But it means going back and like re-implementing this stuff in every piece of your code, in every application, in every service. And so, I've talked to companies in the past that they'll say like, "Oh yeah, we have 5,000 applications that we run," and it's just like you're like, how do you even know where those all are? And that's honestly a problem. Is like they don't like some guy wrote this thing that's running and he doesn't even work at the company anymore. So who's going to go and fix his code and add open telemetry instrumentation? And so I think when you're early, when you're a young company, especially again, all this is very different now with AI because you can just tell Claude like, hey, I want all this instrumented, like just add that to your plan, and you can do that. But I think that's an easy way to kind of make sure that you're future proof and you're ready when you're starting out a new company or a new project.
So do you think that now with AI and all these agents that the massive amounts of logs are going to improve the performance of these apps so that agents directly run over the logs and like, oh, we found a bug here. There's a security issue here. Hey, senior dev, this is what we need to do. What's the next step?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think there's going to be a lot more. I mean, even right now, if you've got, if Claude has access to your logs and stuff, you can generally get a pretty good sense for, like, you say, hey, something happened, yesterday at 1 p.m. Go look at the logs and tell me what happened, and it could generally do a pretty good job. I think the place where the industry is still moving towards is how do you have, if you're generating a lot of data, how do you actually do that in a real time way, in an automated way where you don't have to be the one that says, hey, something broke, go look at it. It's it's doing it and it's looking at it, because most LLMs, like, you can't feed it terabytes of data a day. Like, you don't have the capacity to do that. But over time, systems will get better at like at doing that, and kind of like making those real time interpretations. And then it'll be the one that tells you like, hey, I just noticed this system's doing something weird. You should go check it out. Here's some places to look, or oh, or even I fixed this for you. I wrote the patch for you. Just hit the green button and we'll merge this into production to fix the bug. I think that's where we're headed.
Every coder's wet dream right there.
It is. I mean, we've been talking about this stuff for a long time where, we've had things like, blue green deployments, and we're always like kind of auto deploying to environments. And now it's just going to the loop's going to get tighter where, things are going to things are going to break. Probably because maybe an agent pushed a breaking change and some other agent detects it and fixes it. And I mean, we're absolutely going there. It's just a matter of time, where we get reliable enough with the systems and have all this stuff kind of figured out end to end. But I mean, at the end of the day, not to beat a dead horse, but like, observability is going to be the way that the agents know what's gone wrong. They're not going to be able to go log into every system and go and like poke at them. They're going to be looking at this telemetry, metrics, logs that are coming back to some centralized place, and they're going to be able to say, oh, because I have this telemetry, I was able to figure out that this thing is broken, and here's what I did for you.
I saw on your website on Hydrolix that you have a 20x at least compression. The question is for me, how does it impact AI and the agents? And in general, how does the compression impact queryability, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, compression's primarily important because that's the way that we keep it affordable. Like, we keep it cost effective. Like, storing raw data, it would be insanely expensive, and so compression really is the way that we keep that data cost down. But you're asking the right question, which is like, how much compression is too much, and how do you keep the compression kind of optimal for cost without sacrificing performance? And so that's kind of always an open question, and it's just like a lot of the data format that we've evolved. We've tried to figure out how do we deploy as many of these tricks as possible. Looking at the way the data is structured, looking at repetitive patterns in the data, breaking it apart in certain ways to get that compression, but still making it easy when you have a query to go and quickly look through that data and find the stuff that matters without having to go, touch every piece of data, because that's what kills query performance. And so you know, not things you're necessarily familiar with, but there are things like Bloom filters and some sort of like statistical ways of looking at data given a particular query and saying like, I'm fairly confident that that this piece of data I'm looking for is in here. So I'm going to go through. It may not be, but I have a high likelihood. So you can go pick a little bit more selectively what data you want to query against. And there's, this is what computer science is all about. Just like coming up with all these like interesting data structures and indexes that let you, cut down the amount of work that you have to do. Because at the end of the day, there's still no shortcut for like you actually have to go get the data that you want to answer a query. So, in a perfect world, you would go get exactly what you need and no more. And that's sort of like the perpetual dream. But
That just reminded me of Pied Piper from the show Silicon
oh
Valley.
yeah,
I know they
yeah,
do a compression algorithm a little bit
yep.
differently, but still, I was like, there's a lot of similarity here. Was it like 27? I don't know what the compression was, but I have another question. How much of today's internet traffic is actually bots versus humans, and how does that actually impact of observability, or does
Yeah,
it not have any?
I've had a couple of conversations like this recently where everyone's kind of got their own guess. I would say right now, I think we're probably still there's probably still more human traffic than bot or agent traffic, but I do
Mhm.
think it's gonna change. I mean, I think we've kind of like given everybody the power to be able to just go, create an agent with Claude and go do stuff autonomously. And so I think it's probably not nearly as proliferated as much as it will. But I think at some point in the next, year or two, we'll probably see bot and agent traffic start to get close to or surpass human traffic. And I think it's even an interesting kind of thought experiment to just imagine like what happens when agent and bot traffic is like way more than human traffic. It's like presumably we'll get there. So what happens when the internet is like 10 times more bot traffic than human traffic? And so I think it's going to be interesting to think about how we build systems and services when agents become the primary consumer. Like things like fancy user interfaces aren't going to matter to agents. They're going to want whatever is the most efficient, decodable interpretation of the data. And so I think we're gonna see a shift in building these AI first, either API endpoints or data representations. And I think that's going to start to become something that people invest a lot more time in, and we're going to see people care a little bit less about, um, you know, really fast JavaScript front ends and stuff like that, and because it just isn't going to matter to agents. And so there's definitely going to be a shift there. I don't know what time horizon that's going to happen on, but it's going to happen.
Have you thought about the impacts of agentic traffic on business models that are ad heavy? For example,
Yeah,
blogs.
totally. Yeah, I think ad placement in web pages is, I mean, we've already seen a pretty huge decline, I think, and I think that's going to continue. And so I think there's going to be places, obviously, where the world's always going to find places to put ads. Like that's just sort of been the history of civilization. But I think it's going to be very different. I mean, I don't know if you guys were, in the space 15, 20 years ago when you used to be able to have just like a blog and you could just throw AdSense on it. This is like early days of Google, and you could make like
Yeah,
$1,000 a month just with like you just throw a JavaScript thing on your
really.
page and you'd make money. And that declined over time, and more of that money got pushed to Google and centered on the search results. And but the value of that stuff has gone down. I think it'll eventually go down to the point where um, if you are asking your AI agent for search results instead of Google, like there's just not going to be as the market's going to shift. It'll find a new home.
I have a counterpoint there for that one because in general, if for example, it might be also with YouTube views, etc. So maybe just the CPM might go down because in
Yeah.
the end, if it's most of them is like the traffic is goes more to AI agents. So basically, you get more views in general, 10x more views, but in general, you get less revenue because most of them might be calculated towards the AI agents. But it also brings to me to another question, like with more and more agents. Being on the internet, what does it actually make for analytic data? Because won't it be then unreliable in like a few years? Because like,
Yeah, and you sort of asked a question earlier that I didn't really answer, but I do think I think you're right. The CPM just may shift. We'll just see it calibrate. Um, but I think there's sort of two questions. I think one is, well, with observability, I think as we start to have more and more agentic traffic, I think observability is just going to matter more, honestly, because you're going to be, traffic volumes are going to go up. The insights you want from your infrastructure are still going to be the same. Like that's the thing that's interesting is like the technology running behind all of this is not changing. We still have the same CPUs and memory and disks, and it's all running the same infrastructure. It's just changing what's running on it is what's changing. And so having to monitor all that stuff is still going to matter. The performance of the things that you're deploying is still going to matter. And again, I think with agents actually consuming that observability data, it's going to be um, more interesting, more important to have that telemetry. And then I think the other piece of it is, as more of traffic becomes agentic, yeah, I think the way we think about um, even calculating things like CPMs or calculating user analytics, it's all going to change a ton. And I think we'll see new ways of doing agentic user analytics, and there's going to be new companies that emerge or old ones that pivot to being a lot more focused on um, the agentic experience and like caring what kind of performance agents are seeing. Because right now, I don't think nobody that I know of is really concerned with that. Like, how fast can your agent scrape your website? Everybody's just sort of sidestepping that problem for now. And I know there are a couple of companies that are trying to help um, publishers and the owners of content figure out how to monetize that data for agentic use cases. Think like New York Times and stuff like that, where they still publish content, but they don't want it to just become completely commoditized by agents, scraping their traffic. So I think we'll see some stuff evolve there. There's also a bunch of stuff happening in agentic commerce. Like, how do you actually give agents the ability to make purchases and like do it securely and in a way that um you know companies allow versus right now a lot of agents are just sort of doing crazy stuff on e-commerce sites, he's scraping prices or doing stuff like that. They're not doing like legitimate commerce, and so I think we'll see a shift there as well and a whole
Didn't
push
OpenAI
around
try that?
with that.
Didn't OpenAI try that? Didn't
Yeah, they tried with
OpenAI?
Walmart.
But I'm not sure. I didn't hear any news from that. Like, yeah, they shut it down. So Walmart had it with OpenAI, had a collaboration, and what I heard is that Walmart said at some point it doesn't make sense for them because the basket size decreased dramatically. So instead of buying more, because on the website you push other things as well, you can see them. Whereas agentic is more directly, I just want the peanuts and
Yep.
not also I want the bananas.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, if you think about, Amazon's the same way. Like, you buy something and they're like, oh, you add one more thing and you'll get free shipping. And, there are all these things that have been, built around human psychology, for a shopping experience that agents just do not care about. And so, I think, whatever, we'll find other ways for that stuff to work. But there's a whole field of agentic commerce that I think has to be figured out. And it's everything from, having authorization tokens for agents that are allowed to buy. How do you handle payment information? What happens when agents go and buy a bunch of stuff that you didn't ask them to buy? Like, there's a whole field of stuff to sort out there, but I think that's also an inevitability.
For the payment method with an agent, it just made me think about Apple chip on your phone where you just have basically your cards
Yep.
information stored. I don't know how that would work in an AI agent or something like this, but like there must be an equivalent something like this that is just like separated.
Yeah, and I know there are some, like, there was a bunch of stuff in crypto about how you actually could store, secure tokens inside of chips and stuff like that within computers. I mean, honestly, right now, I think people are just going to store credit card numbers and just
Okay.
send them through. It's not too different than the way we've been doing a lot of e-commerce stuff.
On
And
the phone.
yeah,
I'm like, hey, yeah, what's your credit card number? Yeah,
yeah,
and now give me the
that's right.
secret three numbers. And we're like, yeah, here, 316, whatever, four.
Yeah. Yeah. People just hand it over to their agent freely right now. But yeah, so all those are great questions. I think it's all going to have to get, you know, there's going to be solutions that come to figure that all out. But yeah, it's coming no matter what.
I am super curious to find your opinion on, have you seen, okay, Gary Vee, I follow Gary Vee a lot, and has been talking a lot about live shopping, and this is a massive new trend. And I want to hear your opinion on that in terms of how that impacts also mass amounts of data, because I feel like could be something that could be analyzed a lot, or you don't think so?
Explain live shopping to me. I have a guess, but
Okay, so live shopping, basically, you remember one in the 80s or 90s or something, or I think in the early 2000s, that you go on a TV show
oh,
or
like
at like this
QVC.
the
Yeah,
TV, exactly, exactly.
yeah.
But now it's also online. So in China, there's already a massive trend. They're selling like billions of dollars
TikTok
worth of,
Live,
exactly.
Instagram
It's just
Live,
a TikTok Live,
Twitch.
Shop, etc., and all this stuff. And the interesting idea is, or have you ever heard of someone doing analytics for that kind of stuff, and then doing what you're doing, analyzing it with the AI bots as well,
Yeah, I
while you
mean,
guys are doing some work?
it sounds a lot like the CDN use cases that we're going after now for live events, because like with a live event, you care about any individual user's device. Like, hey, this person's they're getting a laggy experience. Is it because their phone is broken? Is it because their internet is bad? Is it because they're running some weird version of Android that our app doesn't work on? And so I think the same thing applies for this live shopping concept, which is like you want to make sure that every person is able to get good performance so they can buy quickly and transact efficiently. And so I think it's the same paradigm, just in a slightly different market. And I think a lot of you know we're our focus at Hydraulics is how do we make sure that we can get the data in as efficiently and quickly as possible so that you're not, waiting a minute to see what happened, a minute ago. You want to know what's happening right now. And so everything that we've done is, keeping ingest time of data, like keeping it so that from the time we get the data and the time you can query it is like less than a second. And so a lot of these like live observability use cases are things we've already solved for other industries. So my guess is it's going to be a very, very similar experience to what we see with like people watching the Super Bowl.
I'm super curious to see if in the next few years you're going to get TikTok as well on as a client in that regard,
I
because
I
it's
mean,
massive already.
for me, I'm also wondering for okay, two things. One is if you have what is it called when you bet on outcomes?
The website,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The market, what is it called?
Poly Market.
Uh, Poly market and stuff
Yeah.
like this.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm not sure whether that would actually be a use case or not. And the second question that I have is like, because all your thing that you work in is very complex. How is you as a mental model? How do you simplify complexity to tackle these problems?
So I
You
think,
personally.
yeah, I think to your first question, I think the prediction market stuff is interesting, but it's not as high volume as like like live shopping we are talking about, or like watching an event, because stuff's happening really fast in real time for like hundreds of millions of people. Things like Poly Market, put your bet and you leave, and behind the scenes something's like crunching the numbers every time somebody makes a new prediction or events change, but it's not super real time, and so I think that makes the observability piece a little bit less necessary, less like critical. Um, for complexity, I think one of the things that I really try to keep in mind, and I mean it's not nothing crazy, but like just really breaking things down into boxes and lines. Like, what are the steps that any complicated system is doing? What data feeds into what piece? Like, what are the dependencies? And so if you can take uh, any system that's complex and you can break it down into its constituent parts and understand the relationships between them all, um, that I think is a really good way of understanding. And I mean, and honestly, it fits like sort of with how people build software. As you know, each piece that you build is focused on a specific job, and so I think being able to think about software that way helps with just the complex understanding. But I think it's part of what makes it also possible for teams to build stuff independently. They agree on APIs. And again, I think, this all applies in the age of AI as well, because like you can just say, hey, agent one, you go build this. Here's the API contract. Hey, you go build this. Here's the API contract. And, if they either through you or together are communicating about those interfaces where they're sharing data, that's what matters that makes it possible for them to kind of work autonomously.
I have another question. What would your younger self not believe about your life today?
Oh man. I don't know. I think maybe just, and I mean, honestly, like my 5 year ago self probably wouldn't have believed it either, but just that we would so quickly get to the point um, where code itself would become uh, less of a critical factor, that we would actually see such a quick shift from sitting down, writing code by hand to really being able to, like, in a lot of cases, hand off large chunks of that to AI. But then having to really learn and get better at, how do I plan? How do I architect? How do I think ahead to where the problems are going to be so that I can solve those up front? Yeah, I definitely didn't see this shift coming as fast as it did, and certainly, me 20, 30 years ago, I think wouldn't have believed it. But I mean, we've been
Me
predicting it
neither.
for a long time. I mean, it's like everybody's been talking about it. It's not like we should have been surprised, but I think things really just flipped. I think in a big way the last year or two. Um, yeah, I mean, it's a super exciting time. I mean, everybody's having a wild adventure right now.
100%. Todd, what's a belief that you had early on in your career, but that turned out to be wrong?
Oh, um, I think maybe that um, that technology or that software was the most important part of a successful business or successful company. And I think it's been said by many other people, but it really is like being able to get humans to work together with each other. Really getting people to, like, work together as a team. There's rarely ever one person who just sits down and writes all the code and it's like, there we go, everything's going to be successful now. Like, you still have a lot of people that have to understand what you've done. Other people at other companies have to know how to use it. And so I think that's the piece where, and I think it's actually becoming even more interesting with AI, obviously, because um, even right now we see engineering teams where some people just want to take Claude and go just spend 12 hours a day with it and not talk to anybody. And then we have other people who are totally freaked out by what's going on and have no clue how to sort of recalibrate. But we still have to figure out, how do we get all these people to work together, and how do we agree on workflows where AI can be, a critical piece. And so, at the end of it, like, yeah, we're not going to just make the company one person sitting with Claude. Like, we still have to figure out how we're actually gonna collaborate as a team. So I think, really just understanding people are the heart of everything.
Thank you,
Agree.
John. Like that's the thing. Like nowadays with AI, it becomes more and more important. Like the personal connection, um, and also distribution. For me, like I see it in more and more that, as you said, like code becomes less and less important, and more it's like connecting with other people as well as that. If you have distribution, that's always king.
Yep, agreed.
Todd, we want to be mindful of your time. So where can people find you?
Let's see. I'm Todd at Hydrolix.io. You just, yeah, Google me. I'm around. And Yeah, I'm happy to chat anytime. Um, really interested in startups. Love talking about startups, and especially with the way things are shifting with AI. Ever interested in talking about observability? Just look me up.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Todd. It was great talking to you. We learned a lot. Honestly, never heard of observability before. And I was like, what the hell is this? But now I'm like, damn, this is important. This is some really, really, really cool shit. Man.
Yeah, it's everywhere.
I really
Yeah.
appreciate it, Todd.
Now you're gonna see it everywhere you look.
Exactly. It's like you can never unsee this for sure.